Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you had a great and refreshing spring break. I believe it was much needed for everyone. Now that we are back, in today's class, we will be going to have a recap on the chapters that we did before we went for the break. So in today's class, we will be looking at chapter 6.1 and 6.2. If you can recall, we were going through chemical reactions. So let's not waste any time and let's get right into it. Before we start, I would just like to remind you of the pledge that you took earlier in the first term about cyberbullying. So we all made the pledge that we will never participate in something like cyberbullying or online harassment. And if at all we do come across this, or if we witness our friends being cyberbullied, then I want you to recall the 3 steps that we spoke of earlier. That was stop, block, and tell. So you stop, you log off the site or the platform that you or your friend is experiencing cyberbullying on. You block the messages or the person and you don't respond to them. And then you must tell an adult. It could be your parent, your class teacher, or the online safety representative or the online safety leader of your school. So it is very important that you know the mechanisms that are in place in your school for reporting such kind of incidents, and that you don't take part in these kind of activities, right? So let's then start our lesson. So in a chemical reaction, the substances that react are called reactants. And once these reactants react together, we get completely new substances forming, which we call as products. So we know in a chemical reaction, the chemical equation is written in a proper format, which is shown here to you. So we have the reactants written on the left side of the equation, and we have the products written on the right side. And they both are shown, the chemical reaction is shown by this arrow, right? So we have the reactants reacting together, and then we showed the reaction taking place with this arrow. And on the right side, we write our products. Now, you may be asked to write a chemical word equation for a reaction. And I have seen a few students still write chemical reactions like they will write reactants on the right side, on the left side, and then they'll give me an equals to sign, and then they will say that, oh, here are the products. No, this is an incorrect way of writing a chemical reaction. We have a set format, and we must follow that, which includes reactants on the left side, followed by an arrow, followed by a product on the right side. But how do we know that a chemical reaction has taken place? I mean, what kind of clues do we have? We know atoms and molecules are very, very tiny, so we can't really see them react with each other. But if that's the case, then how do we know that a chemical reaction has taken place? Well, there are a few clues that we can use. One of them is bubbling. Bubbles being given off during a chemical reaction. This shows that a gas has been made. So a gas can be a product. Here you can see in this image, we have a solid reacting with a liquid, and that's producing a lot of bubbles, right? One of the reactions that we saw earlier was between vinegar and baking soda, and we know that that also produces a lot of bubbles, a lot of gas, right? So that is one way we can see that a reaction has taken place. Another way is noting a change in temperature. So whenever a reaction takes place, you could have that reaction generates a lot of heat. So, the test tube or the beaker in which the reaction is taking place, that would get really warm. So you know that a reaction has taken place by that change in temperature. It could also be the opposite. During a reaction, the test tube or the beaker could get really cold, even though you have not switched on the AC. So that also shows that a reaction has taken place. So any change in temperature, whether it's an increase in temperature or a decrease in temperature, that tells you that a chemical reaction has taken place. Third, we have change in color. And I feel that this is the most exciting thing when we are in a lab, when we see a change in color take place during a reaction. I feel that's pretty cool. So we have, change in color. Some reactions, they produce products that are colored in otherwise colorless reactants. So one example you can have is rusting. So during rusting, what happens is our reactants are iron, water, and oxygen. And when iron rusts in the presence of water and oxygen, you get rust being formed, right? So rust is the product, rust is formed, and this gives the iron a very brownish red color. So we know that a chemical reaction has taken place. So we saw earlier that a word equation shows us the reactants and products in a reaction. We know word equations always have the reactants on the left. The arrow points to the product that are formed, and we know the products are written on the right. So here I have a question for you. You can pause the video and attempt it and then get back to it once you have the answer. So go ahead, pause the video. So I hope you have answered the question yourself. Here, the question says, when iron sulfate reacts with sodium hydroxide, sodium sulfate and iron hydroxide are formed. Write the word equation for this reaction. So we have this reaction taking place, and the first step that we always make sure that we do when writing word equations is identifying the reactants and the products from the question given to us. So here we have when iron sulfate reacts with sodium hydroxide. So we can see the word react here. So we know these two are our reactants. Then we have sodium sulfate and iron hydroxide are formed. So again, we can get to know that these two are our products. So how will we write our word equation? We would state that when iron sulfate reacts with sodium hydroxide, so we'll give it a plus sign. These two are combining together, they're reacting. So we have sodium hydroxide. Then we will give our arrow. This shows that the chemical reaction is taking place, and we are going to write our products which are formed, and we write them on the right side. So our products are sodium sulfate, and you have iron hydroxide. You can spell sulfate with a PH or an F. It really depends on you. Doesn't really matter. Both of them are correct. So this would be your correct word equation. The reactants are written on the left side and the products are written on the right side, along with an arrow. Remember, it is not equals to, it is always an arrow.